In this lecture, we will talk about the areas of application for visual thinking. And as usually, we will start with the title for the next page. Applications. I will take you through 4 areas of applications as I see them, and we will talk about the intricacies of each in a greater detail as we go. The first area of application is note-taking. That means that you can use the methods and techniques from visual thinking whenever it's required for you to take notes. What are we talking about here is specifically going away from more traditional way of taking notes, where you probably take notes as a series of texts and bullet points and taking down the sentences of what you're thinking or hearing about and aligning the words on paper. So either like bulleted text or just a free text which flows consistently through the pages. Most probably that's the way of note-taking you are familiar with from the school and university times. So the traditional note-taking. And I'm sure that you can get to the benefits of visual thinking by transitioning from the traditional note-taking to something we have discussed already previously under the umbrella of sketchnoting or visual note-taking, where you will go away from just capturing that complexity and instead of just noting down the separate words in a linear way, according to the traditional note-taking, you will switch to understanding by engaging with information and trying to interpret that information into mental models. Basically, you go from a linear interpretation of what you hear to the spatial interpretation of what you're dealing with, and you create, for example, visual models, and sometimes you still take the notes as bullet points, but engaging them with the rest of your mental models captured visually on the white space of your medium. Note-taking can be applied to a variety of different situations. So for example, when you need to reflect on something, for example, you are preparing for a workshop and you're thinking about the future workshop and trying to figure out which structure will work the best, then you can start and create those mental notes as the visual diagrams or structures of the workshop, and you can express yourself and externalize your thinking on the pages of your notebook. So when you are reflecting on something, or for example, you're in a situation when you talk to a colleague and you're trying to help your colleague figure out a solution to a complex situation, and in that situation what you can do is that you can take the notes as you speak to the person, let's say on an A4 paper or again in your notebook, and you can discuss that situation visually so both of you could relate to that and make sure that you understand the situation in the most precise way. So it could be in conversations. And as we discussed and mentioned that before when we were talking about terminology, Of course, you can be taking notes visually when you participate in meetings with other people to engage with the conversation on a deeper level, but also stay connected and participate more actively. So in meetings. And lastly, you can do things like, for example, when you are attending a training and you are a participant there, one of the students, or you're in a conference, and then you can arrange your thoughts and capture the concepts as visual summaries in those events. So conferences and training sessions. It gives you a diversity of situations when you could apply visual note-taking to become more effective in those situations. And again, as a summary, you go away from the traditional note-taking where all of the information is captured merely as sentences of the language in which you speak. And instead, what you do is that you digest information, trying to understand the gist of it, trying to come up with the underlying hierarchy and architecture of that knowledge or information, and try to capture that with the simplest form of a mental model possible, coming up with the structures that support the narrative or the information in question the best way. So that's how you could use that, note-taking. Let's move on to the next application area, which is presentations. So I'm going to write down presentations. I'm sure that if you are involved in creating presentations today, most probably the way you do that is that you open your software for creating slides that you use by default. It might be Microsoft PowerPoint, it could be Google Slides, it could be Apple Keynote. It doesn't matter which application you use for that. I'm sure that most probably the way you create a slide on your presentation is that you create a title, then you try to summarize the underlying concepts of the idea you express in that slide as one or two, maybe three bullet points. And also, you look at that slide and then you think like, okay, it's boring, I need to breathe some more life into it. I bet you go to a website and then maybe you open the Google and then you find an image that you could use for your presentation to help convey the idea behind what you're trying to say in that slide of your presentation. And I think it's needless to say that these presentations, the traditional presentations, are boring and ineffective. So I'm saying traditional presentations are boring and ineffective. And what is wrong with them? Why are they ineffective? The reason for that is that you are not really trying hard and express the gist of your idea when you are coming up with the slides like that. Because you are not really doing the transition from the linear representation of the information to a mental model. You're not helping your audience to jump into what constitutes the essentials of your message. You are still exposing them to the linear representation of it, because you're still capturing all of the ideas in those texts under the bullet points. Yes, sometimes you're using the image to reinforce and support the message, but that's not the same as the underlying mental image that people form in their heads when they effectively go through interpreting the linear information behind it. So instead of that, what you could do is that you could help them go the journey from linear to spatial by figuring out which graphic representation of your idea helps them get into the spatial representation of the same idea faster. So think about the gist of your idea, the essential part of it, the underlying concept of the idea you want to represent on the slide, and figure out which diagram, visual representation, can help the audience get to the underlying idea faster. And the way you could use visual thinking to improve your presentations, now you could, instead of doing like that, you could start with your linear idea, with your narrative, and then find what would be the best representation of that in the format of a spatial diagram. And let's say that's a presentation slide about a certain role and what's expected from that role. And then instead of just writing down all of those role descriptions, what you could do instead is that you could, for example, draw a person in the center of the slide and then say, okay, this is the role we're talking about. And then instead of just the bullet points, create a visual mind map where you will still be using words, sure, but you will show how these different aspects constitute the role visually, because that's probably how people will create those informational structures in their head. Maybe they will try to visualize that for themselves by placing a representation of a role, an image of the role in the center, and then aligning in the network of the related subconcepts of what that role entails. That way, you're still using the text, sure, but this way you actually suggest the spatial visual representation of the information that is much closer to the mental model people will be building inside of their heads. And then we will finish talking about how you can use visual thinking in presentations by just saying that help them go the journey from linear to spatial, come up with the diagram, and then the easiest way to inject these spatial representations in your slides is to, for example, take an A4 paper. Then on that paper, draw the diagram that you're wishing to include in your presentation, like in our made-up example, a diagram of a certain role, and then take a snapshot with your smartphone, and you could use applications such as Microsoft Office Lens to help you improve the quality of the image. And then just inject that processed image inside of your slides software. And that's it. You have a nicely processed, slick and clean looking diagram injected into your slides. You don't have to look for a Google image, and you don't have to bore people with a lot of text. You will help them get to the bottom of your idea faster. So that's how you use visual thinking in the presentation situation. And while I'm gold plating, I'll just go through the major ideas here real fast. So instead of composing the slides through the bullet points and some images you find on the internet, instead think about your idea, try to come up with a spatial representation that reflects that idea the best way than if you're drawing on a physical medium. Grab a new sheet of A4 or a letter size paper, draw that representation on that piece of paper, capture that with your smartphone or with a mobile device, and use some smart applications such as, for example, Microsoft Office Lens, and then insert that image into your slides. And then boom, you have a much more effective presentation, because now it holds a more valuable information, not just a dump from your head containing a lot of words that are so difficult to interpret and could be miscommunicated by your audience in so many ways. The next area of application is explanation and teaching. Explanation and teaching. If you're a trainer professionally, but even if you're not, most probably you find yourself in a situation when you need to explain a complex concept to someone else. It might be a colleague from a different department. It could be a newcomer working on your team and joining just now, and you need to help that person get up to speed. And you need to convey something that is nested inside of your head, and you need to share that information and knowledge that is only available to you, and somehow you need to share that with another person, be it a student on your class or be it a newcomer joining your team. So this is your knowledge, and you need to share it. You need to teach, you need to educate someone. So this is you, and that's your audience. So how can you use visual thinking in order to make this process run smoother? I'll use the example of the traditional training class, but it's easily extrapolated to the situation when you just need to explain to someone something to someone. What usually happens in a training class, if the training class is delivered the classical way, is that the trainer comes to the class bringing a lot of slides on their laptop, and then that trainer is showing those slides to the class. And then the trainer goes through those slides one by one, explaining the concepts using the static images. Sometimes, while the explanation is given, some printed out handouts are given to the class participants. And this is the least effective way of teaching people, because it is only so much of the information that people can absorb in one go, and they are not engaged with this process, and the efficacy of such education is very, very low. So the traditional way of training people is super ineffective. So super ineffective. I will draw a big dissatisfied smiley here. That's your audience. They don't like it. They don't get wiser. This is not working on them. So instead, what you could do is that you could grab a pen and you can stand next to a flip chart. Like this is a flip chart. And you can explain as you draw. Explain something as you draw. And of course, you could also use whiteboards, A4 paper if you're sitting at the same table and the number of people on your class is low, and you can just use a smaller piece of medium. So for example, A4 like letter size or A3 like legal size. It doesn't matter. The magic happens when your audience is there and they're following you while you speak and explain and come up with the mental models of your knowledge as you deliver those explanations to them. This works very effectively. This is the reason why more and more trainers who are professionals and who live from training other people, sharing their knowledge and experience in a certain topic, they tend to switch to the model of delivering trainings when something is explained as they draw those concepts. And the medium doesn't really matter. It could be a flip chart, it could be an iPad, it could be anything that allows a trainer to engage with the audience and make sure that they actually follow along. And if you switch to this way of teaching other people or explaining things to them, I guarantee that this is the most effective way of you delivering your message, of getting your idea across, because people will understand it. But if not, they will tell you where they're failing to follow you or where they fail to understand you. That will give you a full control over the process of transition and the knowledge from you to someone else. And then lastly, the fourth field or area of visual thinking application, as I know it, is facilitation. And we have mentioned this before when I was talking about terminology. We have mentioned how visual thinking can be used in a facilitation setup. So it's going to be a brief section here because we have discussed that already. Just to recap, let's say if you are working with a team of people and you engage with them in different types of activities. For example, it's a regular meeting, it's a solution workshop, or it's a brainstorming session. Or maybe that's aligning on a problem session, aligning on a problem. Or maybe it's reflecting on how things went recently, some reflection, or sometimes it's called retrospective. So when you're working with other people and you're involved in these types of events, what usually happens is that within that group of people, a lot of complex ideas are circulated, and everyone from the team is contributing with their complexity of information they brought into the game. And sometimes you get lost in your personal complexity that you think over inside of your head. Now imagine multiplying that by the number of participants. So visual thinking comes in handy in all of those numerous situations when you work with other people. And regardless of the fact that you're probably not a facilitator, or maybe you're not trained as a facilitator, what you could do is that you could come up to a whiteboard in a meeting room where you are sitting together with your team members, or maybe there is a flip chart stand available in the same room, or maybe you are a technology guy or a girl and you carry your tablet around, which you can connect to the equipment in the meeting room, and you can be drawing on that tablet, and the rest of the people will be able to see what you're doing, regardless of the medium available. What you can do is that once that complex information starts flowing around in that meeting room, you can offer your services and start capturing the discussion or the process visually on the available medium, and my personal favorite is whiteboards. And you can just start coming up with the visual models that support the conversation or the information discussed the best way. And I will show you different cases and methods how depending on the situation you can map it and visualize. But the idea is that you are the person who can volunteer to do that job on behalf of the group of people. And in that way, you suddenly become a facilitator whose job is to make sure that the discussion is constructive and productive, and you arrive to good conclusions that are helpful for your team, that help you achieve the goal or solve the problem at hand. So that's how you can do that. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a facilitator. You can act as one and help your team be better and do your job better and have more fun. So that was the overview of how you can use visual thinking in different situations, and we've come from note-taking, then we continued with the presentation, and then we talked about how you can use that to explain and to train other people, but also how can you use that to facilitate discussion in a variety of situations. I hope you were able to catch up. If not, rewind, put it on pause, and just catch up with my visual explanations again to practice more and also learn how to apply different layouts and use of different icons in order to capture something complex being discussed. And take your time and relax a bit, don't stress yourself too much, and when you're ready, just switch on to the next video.